morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet that we share together. My name is Annette de Graaf, and this is the 100 Connected podcast, where we talk to inspiring people making a real difference in education all around the world. And we're here today with our lovely crew of friends. Here is Cheryl Drippers from Chesa Chesa in Kenya.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Cheryl. And Lindsay Stewart from Sweet Tree Arts in Hope, Maine, the US.
Hello.
I always love saying Sweet Tree Arts. It sounds so lovely. And today, as the final episode in our little Meet the Team series, we get to shine the spotlight on someone very special, someone very dear to our heart, Alex Shapero from HundrED headquarters in Helsinki. Woo!
Hello, everybody.
Okay, Alex, are you ready for your introduction?
Let's
Here
go
we
for it.
So, Alex is a world language educator at heart. After 8 years of teaching French and English from American high schools to Korean primary schools, he shifted his focus toward global educational change. And while studying for his master's in changing education at the University of Helsinki, he was already part of the 100 team, helping shape global conversations around innovation, inclusion, and the power of story in education. And he's got his master's degree right now in his hands. Congratulations, Alex. And Alex deeply believes in the importance of personal connection, community, and clarity in education. He combines research and reflection with warmth, strategy, and curiosity. And he brings people together in ways that feel both inspiring and deeply human. We first met Alex in real life at the 100th Summit in Helsinki in November 2024. And it honestly, just like with all of us, it felt like friendship at first sight. And with Alex, there was this instant sense of trust, fun, and flow. And that's not just us, I think. I think everyone who has worked with Alex, who met Alex, seems to feel the same. His energy is kind of magical, and he's someone you want on your team, in your classroom, and in your life. We are so happy to have him with us today, this time on like the other side of the mic. And Alex, what I'm really curious about is if you could take us back in time and explain to us how your journey in education started for you.
Annette, thank you. Everybody says that these intros are always quite magical, but you have me a little misty-eyed, I'm not gonna lie. So, it really wonderful to hear that. But if I think about my own journey, honestly, I came into education as a career kind of accidentally. Had always been my first job, for example, was actually teaching Hebrew school at my local synagogue. But that wasn't anything serious. But when I graduated from my bachelor's degree with a degree in cognitive science, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do in the world. And I was a really quite shy young adult at that point. I had a hard time getting out into the world. And so I decided to kind of break my life and go somewhere new, go somewhere really challenging. And to do that, I found a role teaching English in South Korea. And that at the time was just something that I felt like I would be able to do competently for a couple of years. But when I got into the classroom, something about that situation just really sparked for me. It was this ability to build a community really quickly and to engage in these shared goals with people who, if you can do it right, all want to be there together. And there's just something so magical about that, about building, weaving a classroom, weaving a community together in that moment. It really integrated all of the parts of me that I've always understood are the things that I am good at and excel at and that make me feel good about being out in the world. So from that point, I also started looking and thinking about how to critically improve things that are around what was going on in the education systems that I saw. So in Korea, I was teaching in an elementary school, and it was quite a strict way of approaching language education. And based on what I already knew from my research, I started applying some best practices there and developing, well, professional development for the teachers around. Kept going with that. So when I came back to the United States, um, I understood that I wanted to continue doing this. So I had a French background. I continued my French studies and became a teacher in an American high school. While I was in that teacher preparation program, I had this incredible professor, Dr. Jean Amick, who completely revolutionized my understanding of how language education could happen. She always led everything with what she called brain-friendly approaches. And given what I already knew about cognitive science, about language acquisition, I was able to take a program that was stilted, that was shrinking, and that was honestly kind of an afterthought and make it into something much more vibrant, community-based, creative, functional, and something that I didn't come home every day just dragging my feet behind me, flopping down onto a bed, and then like trying to breathe into a paper bag to make it into school the next day, but rather into something where I was excited. What are we going to do today? How am I going to teach these kids this lesson? What things are going to emerge out of all of this? And I think that that kind of emergent thinking really reflects the work that I do now at HundrED with this kind of building communities that are focused on something, the shared goal of improving education and understanding that each of us has our own backgrounds in it, our own individual contexts. And when we put those things into conversation, you can't know necessarily what's going to happen. We can have outcomes that we want to approach, we can have outcomes that we want to hit, but we will be much more effective and it'll be so much more exciting if we aren't trying to prescribe what step A, B, C, and D look like, but rather what do we explore them to be? What do they come out as in the end? And that's really what's been driving me for the past almost 2 years that I've been at HundrED, which has been an incredible space for growth, for exploration, and also for humility. I have learned so much through talking with each of you all, through having these conversations throughout the season, but also every conversation I have with our innovators, our ambassadors, the whole community. So it's really been an honor and a privilege to work to build this in a way that little Alex from 20 years ago would never have imagined he'd be having these kinds of conversations, doing this kind of work, and so it's really something quite special.
It is the best. And when you talk about it, your eyes light up. That's so amazing. Can you just go back to the professor that you said changed your way of thinking? What was her name again? The professor that you just talked
Her
about?
name was Jean Amick. She was in her last year of teaching. Like truly, she is retired. Her and my mom are friends now because she had such an impact on my life that my mom was like, I need to get to know you. But she really brought in these theories that were especially informed by TPRS and these comprehensible input strategies that uh, have also led me now to when I came to Helsinki to study, I was looking to find the neurological basis, the cognitive basis behind these methods to see, I understand anecdotally that they work, but I really want to see scientifically, is there data to support that? And that's what led me here. And then from there to HundrED.
Can you explain a little bit what that is for our listeners?
Mhm.
What TPRS
Yeah,
means?
yeah, absolutely. So TPRS stands for Teaching Proficiency Through Reading and Storytelling, which I know will work great for Lindsay, but it's part of a broader umbrella of language strategies called comprehensible input that focus on this idea that there's a separation between learning a language and acquiring a language. So learning a language is something that is really effortful, that takes a lot of hard work that we normally think of memorizing grammar rules, conjugation tables, vocabulary. And for a certain subset of students, this will absolutely work. There's about 5 to 10% of kids who really love it and they do really well. And I think we've all gone to school with those kids who like just take to that like a fish to water. And so what that means is you have roughly 90% of students who are doing something really effortful and something that takes a lot of stress. And we also know that young people, everybody is perfectly capable of learning a language without doing this really hard work. So what do we need to do? And why is it that as adults, we default to the explicit knowledge mechanisms as opposed to finding ways to use the implicit knowledge mechanisms? So comprehensible input are a set of strategies that are targeted towards those implicit mechanisms. And what they do is that they kind of hijack our natural ability to follow a narrative, to get invested in these things. And by using specific principles, especially from zones of proximal development, from repetition, from all of these things that we know will build in not the frontal network, but rather more distributed throughout the brain, these connections build a more acquisitional, so a more foundational approach to language with the idea that at the end of it, kids aren't so concerned about, am I saying this right or wrong? But rather what naturally bubbles up when I try to say something. Because if you don't know why it's right or wrong, you can't be worried about it being right or wrong. And I strongly believe, and I think all of us have learned other languages, that worry about feeling like a
Alex, I am wondering, it's so clear to me the positivity and the playfulness that you bring into your work. I wonder if there are some examples of how you may implement that or have implemented that in the classroom to keep that open network and to keep people engaged. We know we've got to stay, especially from what you're saying, in a really positive emotional place. Do you have some? I think that's beautiful. I want to let Sherelle take over, but I'm curious if you notice a different percentage of students in your classroom then fully engaged in the learning. Back to that, like 10. That's wonderful.
I still remember a TPRS lesson from, I think, 15 years ago. And I still remember that whole story about the main character and using the past tense. So that's really cool. It's my brain, and I can still use it when I speak Spanish. I'm like, oh yeah, we use that word like we went to, so I know how to say that. And it's amazing.
And I love that. And I love that we're doing this deep dive on you, Alex, because of course, people have now met you over the podcast and we've met you in real life, and many HundrED innovators have met you. There's, like many of us mentioned, a playfulness, and it's so natural how you move, but there's a big scientific, foundation in actually how you approach things. So I love to explore that, and especially at your role at HundrED, because we're talking about children and your classroom experience. But now in HundrED, you all of a sudden work with these innovators and a very different between quotes, group of people. So how do you take that experience to HundrED, and how has that experience been? Because are we that different from the children you work with, or maybe we're very much the same? I wonder what you think.
So it's really clear to me your openness and curiosity is so important for the work of 100 and how that helps all of us. I really felt it this year, and I just want to thank you for that, for opening up conversations and seeing you do that with numerous people throughout Summit. It's a real gift to know the power behind those small moments, and you do that really well. It's a commendation.
Yeah, I wanted to echo that, Lindsay, as well, because I think this was exactly what I wanted to understand with my question, and you went beyond that, because we all felt that during the summit, and that felt so natural. But there was a very big intention behind it of course, you and the 100 team that facilitated that. But I think for me, at least, it was so natural coming into that space, and there was connection left and right. But somehow I love that we hear the story behind it, and that there was a lot of intentionality behind it, and it worked out. I think we're the living proof of that. So again, just echoing what Lindsay said with that sentiment. Yeah.
So when we were in Helsinki, all of us, in November 2024, we met several students from the program Changing Education. And I remember when they told me we're studying Changing Education, I was like, what? Is this like a fairy tale university? What is this? That sounds like a dream. What is it? Tell me more. And I loved hearing their stories. But for anybody here listening who feels the same, like so curious and so enthusiastic, even about just the title of the study, Changing Education. Alex, can you please tell us more about what the program, what it holds, what you do, what you learn, what it has brought you? Please.
Okay, yeah. So the name changing education is a real stroke of marketing genius, I think. It is so enticing. Like, who wouldn't want to come? And so one of the things that's really resulted out of that is that they have developed a pretty remarkably international cross-disciplinary group of folks that come together every year. My cohort had about 50 people in it. 90% again were international, and we had everybody from, teachers with 10 years of experience, people that were fresh out of their education programs, people that were looking at different aspects of education, school psychologists, pharmacists, really everything across the board. And we were all really encouraged to bring our own perspectives and to build exactly these kinds of global networks, with the idea that when we finish, we have resources around the world that we can rely on to try and affect change to education. So one of the things that's interesting, and one of the reasons why they chose that name, is that you can't tell if changing education is a noun or an action, right? Is it a thing, or is it a thing you do? And that also means that each of us are able to bring our own approaches to that. What stood out to me most about the program is that it unites educational psychology, curriculum theory, and for me personally, the most interesting was the cognitive science, the neurology of education. I had the great opportunity to study really the neurodynamics of language acquisition. So I got to do a brain stimulation experiment where I was using comprehensible input adjacent methods. The science isn't quite there yet to research if these comprehensible input things are really scientifically rigorous yet. We still need to build up the basic science to get there. Really working on exactly that basic research to try and get there. So it was a very cool experience for me. And then also so multivariate, so multidisciplinary that I had the opportunity to start at 100 as a trainee, which is how my journey at 100 began and what brought me to all of you.
Can we stay on the neuroscience just for a second?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, since you've studied this area so thoughtfully, if you have ideas of how understanding our neurobiology more can help lead to more equitable practices in the classroom. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot about the importance of emotional health, of social emotional skills. And often I think it gets lumped in for people who are looking at this from the outside as a thing that's nice, a thing that makes school more pleasant. But what we don't think about so often is that if the brain is stressed, if it goes into the stress mode, if the cortisol levels are too high, literally the new synapses can't grow in the same ways. We cannot form the same connections. And the learning that is established is going to be things that are kind of flashpoint, that are really tied to a specific context. So that the only time that that learning is really retrievable is when students are in a very similar context. So again, when they're put back into something that might be really high stress, when they are smelling or seeing or feeling those same things that they felt then, if you have something that is more comfortable, more welcoming, more open, then what you get is learning that is a little bit more um, generalizable and that can be brought into more context and more areas. And specifically when I think about language and language education in particular, there's an idea popularized by Stephen Krashen called the affective filter, which really states that there's a couple of things that will provide a true barrier to acquisition and instead require that the explicit language networks and explicit learning systems are used, as opposed to being able to access the implicit learning systems. And one of the things that I have been really surprised by in my studies about these two different memory systems and learning systems is how little communication there is between them. We might think that if you repeat something enough times, explicit, 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 that somehow it will seep into the implicit system, but really it kind of has to use these workarounds to get there. And so if you want something to be known in the bones, you have to really teach it in a way from the beginning that will get there. And that requires that students feel comfortable, that requires that students feel welcomed and warm, and that requires an approach to making sure that every student is included, that equity is at the basis of what you're doing in the classroom, and that you're not presupposing lots of knowledge coming in, that you're not presupposing ways of thinking, ways of knowing, and ways of learning.
What a beautiful question, Lindsay. Thank you. I wanted to tap into also the name of the master's degree, but also all of the international students and the richness of the group. So how do you feel education is changing? So it's called Changing Education. Maybe you are changing it, maybe it is changing. So what are some thoughts of meeting these different people and then learning all of these new things? And what Lindsay said, I think education is changing, right? Like we know so much more about the brain, and how is education changing?
I mean, that's such a big question. And you can look at the big trends, right? The easy one is AI is everywhere. And as I have some of my colleagues that are looking into studying PhDs, if you don't have AI included somewhere in your research plan, it's not going to go anywhere, right? Like that's what everybody is interested in. But what I think that focus misses the moves, at least in theoretical circles and people who are trying to develop teacher training towards this more individualized and humanized aspect of it. And I think that there's absolutely going to be a lot more AI that is integrated into lessons, but I also think that there's going to be a big focus on teachers really trying to offload all of the rote stuff onto a robot where it doesn't matter and to explore the more creative things, the more in-depth things with their students. At least that's what I would like to see. But the global trends, we know that education is not as effective as it used to be. We know that there is a learning crisis. We know that there are problems with not access to education, although more than there has been in recent years, but rather access to the knowledge that is embedded in it. And so what we need to do is continue pushing towards finding different ways that are going to help make this education more effective. And to do that, we need to understand the roots of these problems. Is that inequality? Is that climate anxiety? Is that this feeling that we are more and more isolated? Is it addiction to digital devices? There's a lot of things that we need to understand and know about. And that's where a lot of the research is happening here. In the context of Helsinki in particular, there's a lot of critical discourse about the role of education export and especially of Finnish education export. Finland for a long time has been banking on its results in the PISA scores from over a decade ago, which are definitely no longer valid. And were they ever valid in the first place? Was it ever a real thing that could be exported? It's a real question. And what we think at HundrED is that no, we can't say that any one idea is going to work. Instead, what we need to consider are like, what are the nuggets? What are the things that we can extract and replicate in new contexts that are really going to help those new contexts flourish? So our conversations about scale have evolved a lot over the past 7, 8 years to really encourage deeper scaling and scaling out as opposed to scaling up. So changing how governments are thinking and operating and changing what kinds of people we're reaching and how we're reaching them. What are we doing with these folks once we're able to engage them in a better and more humane and more holistic educational approach? And I hope and I think that that's where things are going.
question about equity, actually, because I heard you say that. And it's for many people, it's still quite an unknown word. So many people think it's the same as equality. But can you explain a little bit more about equity and maybe also how that relates to child-centered learning?
Mhm. Yeah, to really ground it in an example. So I also had the opportunity to lead our student organization here. So my job was to help our professors understand how do you teach such a varied group of students? Education here is very based on equality, is very based on everybody feeling like they can do whatever they like. But if you're coming out of an education system that doesn't reflect those values, then you as a student don't know when it's appropriate to speak up. When is it appropriate for you to voice an opinion, to push back, to do all of these kinds of things? And so what that meant is that we had kind of um, a segregation, not by any means enforced, not by any means wanted, sought for, but of students who felt like their voices should be heard and students who felt like they didn't have room to speak within the class. Equality is saying every student has a right to speak and every student has the opportunity to speak. But equity is instead thinking about how do we build our educational experiences? How do we build conversations? How do we build readings? How do we build all of these things to make it so that every student feels like their voice is wanted and that there is active space made for that? So maybe that's not asking whole classroom discussions in a wide open space. What do you think about this? What do you think is wrong with this concept? How would you push back on that? And rather having small group discussions where people can develop these ideas together and then asking students to report on somebody else's viewpoint and how they feel that that affects them. So that way, one person is feeling that they're super exposed, and it's building these cultures and conversations of challenge, of critical discourse, of analyzing and building through like this. And so when you think about equity, you can't just think that, okay, I've put all of the cards on the table, so it's up to you to do it. Instead, I need to think, how do I need to position things? How do I need to do it so that you know that you are wanted here and that there are no barriers in the way for you doing it, whether or not I put them there or I meant them to be there. And so building things out in that way.
And I ask too, then, how storytelling has been an important part of that. Because when I hear you talk about that, the things that rise for me are knowing that that narrative, when we work out of a place of a storytelling tradition, we are honoring each person's unique experience. We're searching and trying to elevate their voices because that's what we're most interested in. We want to know what's their story, what's who they are, and what their voice can be and will be. And when I see that in my classroom, all the things you're talking about naturally fall into place. I wonder if that's an experience you've also had, understanding deeply the storytelling tradition and practice.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when I am trying to apply it to my own history in the classroom, I think a lot of it is having the humility to say, I don't get to decide what your story is going to be, right? What I'm going to do is say that now we are going to tell a story. And this time it's your turn to drive this into the way that you want it to be. And it can be a story that reflects your own life, but it can also be a story that reflects your own spirit, what you want to come out and what you would like to imagine. So I think that that as a basic starting point is really important. But the other part of it too is, when I was doing my assessments, I would also often ask kids to just tell me a story. This is not something that we're doing in front of everybody, but how are you interpreting these things? These ideas that we've talked about, grocery stores and taxi cabs and airplanes and travel. What is your dream for this? And what if you don't have a dream? How do you want to talk about that too? Because I don't want to assume that you have a vision for your own future. I didn't have a vision for my future. I never knew what it was going to be. It was always wide open. And so I think a big part of equity in education comes out of humility, I think is a really basic part of that, and of honoring the wants and needs and experiences of the individual child as they're coming into your room and saying, we're partners here. I have experiences and expertise and tools that I want to share with you. And I also know that you have things that I'm excited to learn about too.
That's beautiful. And it highlights like the power of child-centered learning. really seeing the child for who they are and where they are at, and meeting them there, right there where they're at and what they are ready for to develop. And that is, I think, when you think about changing education, if we have more awareness of this, if we have more focus on the child instead of putting a program on a whole group of children, as we've done in the past for many, many, many years since the start of education, right? But I think the change of education is instead of putting the program on them, really letting them lead the program and letting them be in charge of their own learning journey and steering that, empowering that, fueling their own learning journey and understanding why they're doing what they're doing. I really want to do that instead of having to do that because somebody told me so.
Mhm.
So I think if you think about changing education, that is such a beautiful and empowering shift. And so many innovators are working on that in their own way. And I think that's really exciting. Also, that spotlight on child-centered learning. I'm so excited about that.
I wanted the opportunity for Alex to tell us something you want everyone to know about HundrED, working on the inside and knowing the work that you all do to support us around the world as innovators, as ambassadors in all of our roles. What do you want us all to know? And there's an incredible team at HundrED. Just like if you want the floor to be able to kind of honor the work at HundrED, I think this is a great moment to do that.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we do really well at HundrED is our packaging and making sure that everything we send out into the world is honoring the work that our innovators do. But sometimes what gets lost in that mix is how small of an organization we are and how dedicated we are to really this mission of supporting the innovations that are out there. And one thing that I wish would happen a little bit more often actually is that our community asks more things of us. We are here to build these connections. And if you have an idea of a group that you want to get together, we want to facilitate that kind of work, even more than we do. So that would be the one thing that I would say as an Ask from 100. We are inspired by the work you do, and we want to help you push it forward in ways that are meaningful and interesting to you. That being said, of course, we have to be aware of financing and resourcing constraints and all of this. But if there are ways that we can build communities to support this, then all of us would be thrilled to do that. So if you have an idea, you can email us at community@hundred.org, and somebody will be very happy to get back to you.
Well, this started as an idea as well, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly.
And we made it happen thanks to the support of the 100 team and, of course, of you. Thank you, Lindsay, for that question. That is so important to understand and to know that. And I think everybody who's been to the 100 headquarters understands what you're talking about, that it is such a lovely office and it's like a small-ish office with a small team who's doing big things. So that is, yeah, that's awesome.
It's really cool to be part of a team that's so far above its weight. That's not a real thing that people says. That people say we're going to cut that whole thing out. That does a lot with a little. We'll say it that way.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, Lindsay, can I ask the final question?
Right, I'm ready now. Sorry, I just had
No,
that
it was,
vertically.
do not apologize. It was such a great question to ask and important to understand for all of us listeners. So, Alex, what is your dream, your big idea for the future of education? Please share it with us.
I am so inspired by the science of learning and really that alchemical reaction that comes up when you mix hard science and the art that is teaching and learning and building a community together. And so my dream for the future of education is that we focus more on that little spark, what happens when you mix these things together and what are the beautiful things that can come out of it without trying to constrain it so much and saying it has to look like X, it has to look like Y. Uh, that is my dream, and I think that if we keep working together, we can get somewhere a little bit closer to it.
Yes, every single small step is part of a huge journey, right? And we've already taken so many small steps, all of us here, all of us who are listening. and just keep taking those small steps, because for now they feel small, but they are worth it. They are huge, they are important, and they are seen. And I think that is what HundrED does. That is what you do. You notice those small steps and you honor those small steps and you celebrate them in a big way. And that is so fun. So thank you everybody for listening, for watching, wherever you are. We would love to hear from you, and please tell us what you took away from this conversation today. Thank you, Alex, for talking to us today.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.